Wind whispered through the suspended B-24 wing inside the hangar, a metallic breath that trembled like a living thing. The German engineers, led by Oberingenieur Karl Neumann, stood beneath it, silent, listening. The war had trained their ears to recognize danger in every sound. But this was music. A faint, steady vibration as the afternoon air drifted through the hollow ribs of the bomber wing. Karl tilted his head. "It sings," he murmured. The American guide beside him, Sergeant Frank Weller from Michigan, smiled faintly. Maybe because it was built by people who really sang. The Germans frowned, thinking he joked. Yet Weller explained, the women at Willow Run often sang while riveting, swing tunes, hymns, even lullabies. "It kept the rhythm steady," he said. "You'd hear them down the whole line, hammer, hum, like a heartbeat." The group followed him deeper into the hangar. Above them, sunlight caught the silver skin of the aircraft, lighting rivets like sequins on an enormous gown. The air smelled faintly of machine oil and summer dust. Neumann thought of his own Luftwaffe plants in Bremen, dark, silent halls where workers labored under watchful guards, their faces gray with exhaustion. There was no music there, only orders and fear. Here, in this open hall, he imagined hundreds of women tapping out rhythm, their voices carried on the thunder of drills. Weller continued, pointing toward a photograph pinned on the wall. A line of women in coveralls, heads tilted back in laughter, rivet guns raised like instruments. Beneath it, a caption read, "The ladies who give wings to victory." The German engineers stood transfixed. The contrast was unbearable. A nation that taught women to hide under rubble versus a nation that let them build machines of freedom. The same metal, the same tools, but one difference: spirit. Karl Neumann reached out and brushed his hand across the aluminum. It was cool, humming faintly under his fingertips. The sound deepened, a low harmonic tone that reminded him of an organ note echoing through a cathedral. For a long moment, no one spoke. The vibration was soft but persistent, as if the wings still remembered the songs that shaped it, the voices that kept courage alive through every shift. Weller broke the silence. "You know," he said quietly, "they didn't just build planes. They built belief. Every note they sang was a promise that freedom would fly again." The Germans lowered their eyes. For them, this was not just a lesson in engineering. It was a revelation in humanity. That day, in the quiet of a Texas hangar, the sound of an American bomber's wing became more than the hum of metal. It became the voice of a nation, a song of hands, hearts, and hope carried on aluminum. If you value stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. Where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it where you are? They moved closer to the edge of the great B-24 wing, where light filtered through the hangar's high windows and glimmered along the polished aluminum skin. Oberingenieur Karl Neumann ran his fingers along a line of rivets, then froze. There, barely visible, was something out of place. A fine, curved seam, too delicate for a machine. He crouched down. "This," he said softly, "is handwork." An American technician nodded. "Yes, sir, she patched it herself." "She?" Neumann echoed. The man smiled. "One of our women from Ohio. Used to be a seamstress before the war. She saw a flaw, didn't want the panel rejected, so she stitched the tear with safety wire and sealed it with resin. Said she didn't mind. She'd been sewing all her life." Neumann blinked, tracing the tiny repair as though it were embroidery. The edge was perfect, firm yet graceful. No jagged line, no wasted motion. For him, engineering was geometry, blueprints, hierarchy. But this was something warmer. A touch of the human hand that refused to let imperfection pass. The Germans around him whispered in disbelief. In their world, a defect meant punishment, paperwork, reprimands. Here, a woman had taken it upon herself to correct the error, quietly, without recognition, out of pride in her work. One of the American guards added, "She said her husband's in the Pacific, said maybe his plane might fly on wings like these. Didn't want any man's life depending on a bad seam." The words landed heavy. The hangar fell quiet except for the soft hum of fans overhead. Neumann looked again at that tiny patch, that stitch of courage, and felt something shift inside him. It was so small, no more than 2 inches of wire, but it embodied an empire of feeling. He imagined her sitting at her workbench, brow furrowed, hands moving with the same tenderness she once used to hem a child's coat. Somewhere between the war front and the kitchen table, courage had changed form. He remembered the slogan in his homeland, strength through discipline. Yet here, strength seemed born from care, from a personal decision that no one ordered, no one supervised. Behind them, another B-24 rolled out on the tarmac, sunlight catching its broad wings. The patch seam was invisible from a distance, but Newman could not unsee it. In that tiny mark, he saw the quiet defiance of a nation, one that found heroism not in shouting, but in mending. He straightened, dusted his knees, and whispered to himself in German, "Mut kommt in vielen Formen." Courage comes in many forms. As they left that section of the hangar, he looked back once more. The line of the seam glimmered faintly. A scar, a signature, a bridge between two worlds. The next section of the tour brought them to the production line, a corridor of thunder and motion. Rows of B-24 wings stretched toward the horizon like silver fields, and over them moved an army of women in denim uniforms, goggles glinting, sleeves rolled. The German engineers slowed their steps, stunned by the rhythm. Every few seconds, a pneumatic gun fired. Pop, 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 followed by the sharp hiss of air. The sound repeated in perfect tempo, not chaotic but orchestrated, as if the entire plant were one immense instrument. Engineer Wilhelm Krause, the youngest in the group, began counting automatically. His hand moved across the surface of the nearest wing. 100, 200, 500, he whispered, tracing rivet after rivet. The line of steel dots was flawless, not one misaligned. An American foreman noticed his curiosity and grinned. "You're counting, huh? She does 32 rivets a minute, 8 hours straight, 6 days a week." 32, Krause repeated, frowning. "Per minute?" "That's right, we time it. The whole line's built on rhythm. Even lunch breaks are staggered so the sound never stops, like a song that keeps the planes alive." The Germans exchanged uneasy glances. Back home, they had preached mastery through hierarchy, each worker a servant to the genius of a designer. But here, mastery was collective. No one woman built a bomber. Together, they built thousands. The foreman gestured down the hall. "That's Rosie. She only does nose cone rivets. Been at it since 42. Says she could close her eyes and still hit her mark." A wave of awe passed through the visitors. So this was America's secret. Not divine invention, not some mythical super engineer, but precision by the multitudes. Ordinary women with calloused palms and steadfast hearts, united by a shared tempo. Carl Neumann scribbled in his notebook, 32 rivets per minute, multiplied by 8 hours, by 50 stations. He stopped mid-calculation, looked up, and murmured, "Gott im Himmel." He understood now why the Allies could afford to lose planes and still darken the skies with new ones. At the far end of the hall, the wall clock ticked toward noon. The line slowed. The sound softened, then faded into scattered laughter as women removed their goggles, wiping faces streaked with aluminum dust. One woman began to hum softly, the same rhythm they had worked to all morning. Within seconds, others joined in. A low, warm chorus echoing through the rafters. For the Germans, it was unbearable and beautiful at once. They had built through fear. These women built through trust. Every hammer strike, every rivet driven true, was a vote of confidence in their country and in each other. As the hum swelled, Newman looked down the endless line of wings and thought, freedom doesn't always march. Sometimes it works, steady and unending, to the rhythm of ordinary hands. They entered another hangar, smaller and quieter, where finished wings awaited final inspection. The air was different here, crisp, faintly sweet. It smelled not of oil or fuel, but of something impossibly gentle. Wilhelm Krause inhaled. "What is that scent?" he asked. A young American inspector smiled. "Soap," she said. "They wash their hands before every shift." "Soap?" Krause frowned. "Why?" "Aluminum oxidizes easily. Fingerprints can start corrosion," she explained, rubbing the surface of the wing with a soft cloth. "So they clean up, not because we tell them, but because they care." The Germans fell silent. In the Reich's factories, the air reeked of grease and smoke. Here, sunlight streamed through tall windows. Ferns stood in metal pots along the aisles. Women in kerchiefs moved gracefully from table to table, hands spotless, movements deliberate. One left behind the faint aroma of lavender. Carl Neumann watched her polish a rivet head, smile faintly at her reflection, then step aside for the next worker. She looked nothing like the laborers he had known. No despair, no fatigue, only quiet pride. The American escort leaned close. They say if you touch a bomber built here, you can still smell the home it came from. Soap, coffee, sometimes perfume. We joke the planes carry their scent overseas. Neumann ran his hand along the wing. The metal was cool and smooth. The faint soap smell clung to his skin, and he felt an ache he couldn't name. Strange, he murmured. Our factories smell like fear. Yours smell like life. The inspector nodded. They treat every part as if it might carry someone they love. Maybe that's why nothing feels dead in here. The German engineers stood amid the stillness, and for a moment they could hear the distant laughter from the cafeteria. A warm, domestic sound carried through steel beams and echoing floors. Kraus turned to Neumann. Do you think it makes a difference? Neumann didn't answer at once. He looked again at the shining wing and thought of the stench of their own workshops. Sweat, oil, and hopelessness. He imagined these American women washing away the grime before every shift, scrubbing the war off their skin as if refusing to let brutality reach their hearts. Yes, he said finally, it makes all the difference. Outside, a truck rumbled by, carrying a finished B-24 fuselage toward the airfield. The hangar doors opened and sunlight spilled across the wings. The scent of aluminum and soap mixed in the air, a fragrance of strange purity in a world consumed by war. The Germans watched the plane pass into daylight, and one of them whispered, "Perhaps this is what victory smells like." By afternoon, the engineers were invited into a briefing room lined with photographs, faces of women in goggles, sleeves rolled, smiling beside aircraft tails. The air smelled faintly of warm metal and coffee. On a table rested a small fragment of a B-24 frame, its edge gleaming softly. The American guide, Sergeant Weller, placed a finger on it. "This piece here," he said, "carries a story." The room quieted. One of our workers, name was Helen Doyle, always wore her wedding ring on a chain around her neck. One day, the chain snapped while she was near the forge. The ring fell into the molten alloy. They offered to fish it out, but she said, "No, let it stay. Maybe it'll fly with my husband." He was a pilot in Italy. The German said nothing. Neumann swallowed hard, staring at the dull shimmer of metal. "And did she ever find out?" Weller shook his head. "Her husband's plane never came home. But that story, it spread. Some say her ring's part of a bomber still flying somewhere over Europe." For a long time, no one moved. The hum of distant machinery seemed to fade into silence. Then one of the German engineers stepped forward, touched the piece gently, and whispered, "Dieses Metall trägt ein Gelübde." This metal carries a vow. There was something sacred in the stillness that followed. The thought that love, not just labor, had melted into these machines. That every takeoff might carry not only men and fuel, but promises, hopes, and grief transformed into motion. Weller leaned on the table. "You know," he said softly, "they come here after funerals, after telegrams, after long nights of waiting. They keep working. They say every rivet they drive might keep another husband, another son alive. That's their prayer." One German whispered, "Our women, they hide in cellars." "And ours," Weller said, "build wings." The contrast was unbearable and unforgettable. In that instant, the engineers understood that power could be measured not just in horsepower or tons of steel, but in what people were willing to give without being asked. Neumann found himself staring at his reflection in the alloy scrap. His own wife's photograph flashed through his mind, her letters, written on paper, rationed thinner each month. He imagined her reading by candlelight in a ruined city, and for the first time, shame touched him like a shadow. He turned toward Weller and asked quietly, "Do they know what they have done?" The sergeant smiled faintly. "Maybe not. They just work, sing, and hope someone comes home." The camera of memory lingered on that fragment of metal. Somewhere within it, perhaps, the trace of a gold ring still hidden forever. And for the audience watching today, what would you give, not in war, but in peace, to protect the people you love? They were shown to a drafting room, a long corridor of desks covered with blueprints, pencils, slide rules, and coffee mugs. The smell of graphite mixed with the faint odor of cigarette smoke. Ceiling fans turned lazily overhead. On the far wall hung a huge drawing of a B-24's internal wing structure, dotted with handwritten notes in several different inks. Carl Neumann leaned closer and saw, near the bottom corner, a faint line of text, revised by E. Turner, 1943. The name caught his eye. He turned to the American engineer beside him. "Who is this Turner?" The man smiled. "Eleanor Turner. She's 22, used to be a housemaid. Now she's the lead technician on the night shift." The Germans stared at the signature as if it were a riddle. A woman, young, untrained in their eyes, had revised a section of one of the most complex aircraft in the world. In their own factories, such an act would be impossible. Women typed memos or swept floors. They did not redesign flight surfaces. The American explained, "When one of the draftsmen fell ill, she stepped in, found an airflow issue nobody else caught, saved us a week of testing. We kept her name on every plan since." Neumann blinked. "She is allowed to sign?" "Allowed?" The man laughed. "She earned it." The group exchanged uneasy glances. In their world, authority descended like orders, from generals to engineers to workers. Here, it seemed to rise from initiative, from the belief that anyone with a good idea had the right to speak. Krauss studied the careful handwriting on the blueprint. The letters were thin, steady, confident. Revised by E. Turner. He whispered it under his breath, tasting the quiet revolution hidden in that line. The escort rolled up another sheet, revealing an earlier draft. "See this?" he said, tapping a small note beside the wing spar. "Reduced thickness by 1/16 inch. That was her correction, gave us an extra 120 pounds of lift efficiency. Not bad for someone who used to scrub floors." The Germans said nothing. The sound of typewriters and mechanical pencils filled the room like rain. Around them, women worked side by side with men, laughing, arguing, creating. The air buzzed not with authority, but with ownership. For Neumann, this was more disarming than any weapon. The power of an idea, written in delicate cursive, carrying more weight than an entire regiment. He thought of the young women back home, his own sister, who had once designed a toy glider, but was told to stop wasting her time. What would she have built if given this freedom? He placed his hand over the blueprint, tracing the faint pencil strokes. "This line," he said softly, "might change everything." The American nodded. "It already did. And for you, watching now, do we still allow such courage to sign its name? Or have we buried it under titles and rules?" Evening sunlight spilled through the wide doors of the Texas hangar, painting the suspended B-24 wing in a soft, amber glow. The tour had ended. Papers folded, pencils pocketed, boots scuffing lightly against the floor. Yet none of the German engineers moved to leave. The air felt charged, not with machines or power, but with silence. Carl Neumann stepped closer to the wing. The metal surface shimmered like still water. He laid his palm against it, cool, smooth, and faintly humming, as if some memory still lived inside. He closed his eyes. Behind the darkness, he saw faces. Women in overalls and goggles, hair tied up in scarves, laughter echoing over the roar of compressors. He saw hands guiding drills, lips moving to a tune only they could hear. He heard rivets strike in rhythm, not as weapons, but as heartbeat. He whispered, "Wir haben verloren, nicht weil sie stärker waren, sondern weil sie geliebt haben." We lost, not because they were stronger, but because they loved. No one replied. They simply stood there, men who had once measured victory by steel and blood, now measuring it by something weightless and invisible. Sergeant Weller watched quietly, cap in his hands. The sound of a distant train rolled through the open hangar doors, blending with the faint rustle of wind. "You hear that?" he asked. That's what they worked for, to make sure the world could still have quiet sounds again. Neumann nodded slowly. "Our planes were built for conquest," he said. "Yours were built to return home." The sun dropped lower, its reflection sliding along the curved edge of the wing. The metal caught fire in color, gold, copper, then fading silver. For a moment, it looked alive, breathing. Krauss took a step back, as if before a relic. "It's strange," he murmured, "how something made for war can look so merciful." Weller smiled. "Because it remembers who built it." The camera of memory widened, the immense hangar, the single wing gleaming beneath the sunset, shadows stretching across the floor like silent signatures of all the hands that once touched it. As the group turned to leave, Newman looked back one final time. The wing seemed to float in the dying light, not as a weapon, not as a trophy, but as a monument to human endurance. And when the doors closed behind them, the last sound was the wind slipping through the rivet holes, a faint, almost musical sigh. The wings sang again. Years passed. In a small apartment overlooking the Elbe River, Karl Neumann, now an old man, kept a single photograph on his desk. A group of American women standing under a bomber wing, tools in hand, smiles bright with youth. Sometimes, on quiet nights, he imagined hearing that faint metallic hum again. He would tell his grandson that true strength is not forged by orders, but by choice, that those who build with care always outlast those who destroy with pride, and that somewhere, high above history, wings built by unseen hands still carry the songs of those who believed in tomorrow. The story of Willow Run is not only about planes or production numbers. It is about how ordinary people, mothers, wives, daughters, took the weight of a world and made it fly. They proved that courage can sound like laughter, that love can shape metal, and that freedom sometimes begins with the rhythm of a rivet gun. So tonight, if you listen closely to the wind, you might hear it, the echo of their song, faint but unbroken, reminding us what humanity can build when its hands and its heart work together.